Imagine a psychiatrist who didn't just treat patients but turned his practice into a radical critique of colonialism. That was Frantz Fanon, born in 1925 in Martinique, and remembered today as one of the most powerful anti-colonial voices of the 20th century. Pause here and note this. Fanon argued that colonial oppression in the so-called Third World was not just about class but about race as the central axis of domination and resistance. This was asked in exam. By putting race at the heart of his theory, Fanon gave post-colonial studies its sharpest edge, linking psychology with politics and culture. Drawing on his psychiatric training, Fanon explored how colonialism fractures identity. He spoke of double consciousness, a term you should definitely highlight because it was asked in exam. Colonized people, he explained, live with two conflicting selves, one shaped by their native culture and the other imposed by colonial power. This split produces what he called colonial alienation and sociogeny, the sense that identity itself is constructed by oppressive social forces. Can you recall one of his most memorable lines? "O my body, make of me always a man who questions." Yes, that was Fanon's existentialist humanism, and it was asked in exam. Another unforgettable phrase, "I was indignant. I demanded an explanation. Nothing happened. I burst apart." This captures the psychic violence of colonialism, how it tears apart the self from within. And yes, this one too was asked in exam. But Fanon was not just a theorist, he was an activist. He became deeply involved in the Algerian struggle for independence, writing and working alongside revolutionaries. His final book, The Wretched of the Earth, published in 1961, just before his death, gave a blistering account of colonial violence and the necessity of decolonization. And don't miss this point, it's a classic UGC favorite. This work was asked in exam. For Fanon, liberation was never only political, it was psychological too. True decolonization, he argued, had to be both material and mental, freeing the colonized body and the colonized mind. That's why his work remains central not just to post-colonial theory, but to anyone seeking to understand how oppression operates and how it might be overcome. Pause here and note this down. His book, Black Skin, White Masks, published in 1952, is considered a cornerstone of post-colonial studies, asked in exam. In this work, Fanon examined how colonized individuals are forced to perform whiteness, adopting the colonizer's language and culture in order to be accepted, yet at the cost of their own identity. But here's the painful paradox. Even when the colonized try to assimilate, they are never fully accepted. This fractured existence creates alienation and what Fanon describes as deep psychological scars. He explored this in essays like The Negro and Language and The Fact of Blackness. Can you recall what he says about language? He shows that even language becomes a tool of oppression. As a child, Fanon was wont not to speak Creole French because it was seen as inferior to real French, that is, white French. Imagine how this constant rejection of your mother tongue damages your sense of self. In The Negro and Psychopathology, Fanon took this further, showing how racial hierarchies trap the colonized in an internalized sense of inferiority. Now move forward to 1961, Fanon's last and most explosive work, The Wretched of the Earth, with a preface by Jean-Paul Sartre, asked in exam. This book was so radical that the French government censored it. Why? Because Fanon openly defended violence as a necessary weapon of decolonization. He argued that colonialism itself was born in violence. Algeria, for example, was conquered through military force. Therefore, he said, liberation must also be violent, because it is the only language the colonizer understands. For Fanon, violence wasn't just political, it was cathartic, a way for the colonized to reclaim dignity and humanity. Here's a classic UGC NET point. Fanon also developed the idea of double consciousness, though its roots lie in W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folk, published in 1903, asked in exam. Du Bois described the African American experience of seeing oneself through both one's own cultural identity and through the degrading gaze of the dominant white society. Fanon extended this idea to colonized peoples everywhere, showing how they live a divided self torn between assimilation and rejection. Together, black skin, white masks, and the wretched of the earth reveal Fanon as more than just a theorist. He was a revolutionary. He exposed the psychological scars of racism and colonialism, while insisting that true liberation required dismantling the entire colonial order. That's why Fanon is still remembered as the most influential anti-colonial thinker of his time.